Okay, well, incredible. Another great day on That's Classic. And this is a fun one. I always get a bit of a buzz just doing this. But today we have none other than the gentleman that played Gopher on the Love Boat. He was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives for four terms, by the way, for in Iowa. He has appeared on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Fantasy Island, and so many more. I want to welcome Fred Grandy. Welcome, Fred.
John, thank you so much. You're looking good.
Fred, I like you already. I want to say that
Yeah,
right
yeah. Well,
now.
I'm nothing if not a suck up. I mean, if you spend 8 years in Congress, you learn that skill.
Hey, so I have a right out of the gates. I was curious. I did a lot of research on you, but the one thing I did not, well, there were quite a few things I didn't spot, but one was your audition for the Love Boat. I didn't see anywhere where anyone talked about that or you said anything. What was that process like for you? Like, how did it all come about?
Well, let me preface this by saying, first of all, I never thought I would get an audition for the Love Boat, particularly when, of course, I auditioned for the show before Aaron Spelling took it over.
Yeah.
But once he took command, I was a little apprehensive about my future because I'm the only member of the cast that had ever been fired by Aaron Spelling.
Oh,
So
really? From
I
what?
wasn't sure I was going to be on his preferred list. But I did a pilot. I don't know, 3 or 4 years before Love Boat came on the air, it was called Fireman's Ball, and it was me and a very well known and very prestigious New York actor named Cliff Gorman, who won a Tony for playing Lenny on Broadway,
Oh my gosh.
and some other good folks, Johnny Brown and Dick Yarmy, who was Don Adams' brother. And it was supposedly supposed to be MASH in the firehouse. So we made the pilot, and they fired the cast and kept the Dalmatian in the truck. And then they made another pilot called Where's the Fire? And the network bought that and then canceled it after 3 episodes. So I guess perhaps I was exonerated and did get into the show. But the audition process was pretty simple. And this is a bone of contention that I have with my dear friend and distinguished college colleague, Ted Lange, because he never had to audition because he was kind of a big deal at the network at the time. And I later found out after, I don't know, 3 or 4 callbacks and a screen test and all of that stuff, and the show had been on for a while, that I was just about the only actor in Hollywood who had been offered the show but did not turn it down. And by that, I mean everybody. I mean, a couple of Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders and some dogs. Everybody had said no to Gopher. So I was the last man standing
Oh my
from what I can
gosh.
tell. Yeah. But I stood around for 8 years, so that's not so bad.
No, not so bad at all. So when you went through it though, do you recall like so you went through the audition process, the final
Mm-hmm.
callback or final the
Screen test, screen
screen
test.
test. Did you screen test with any of the cast or anyone or?
No, no, no. And as a matter of fact, I don't even remember who I screen tested with.
Hmm.
Um, and as far as I know, the only 2 people well, 3 people. Lauren Twees had to audition, and Bernie auditioned, and I auditioned. Of course, they offered it to Gavin, they offered it to Ted, and Jill Whelan, who played Vicky, had been on a spelling show called Friends, not the Friends we all know, but
Mhm.
but an early iteration of a show with some kids, and he was very charmed with her and offered her the part of the captain's daughter. So that's how everybody got on the show. And they went through 3 pilots before they bought the show.
Right, right. In
Yeah.
fact, each time, am I right? You've kind of felt like this is not going to happen. This is not going
Oh
to
no,
happen.
I mean, look, the only 2 people, even after the show premiered, who believed this show was going to be a hit and were absolutely convinced it had no other route but absolute success were Gavin MacLeod and Aaron Spelling.
Huh.
Both of those two were unalterably convinced that this was a hit and possibly even iconic. And of course, they were proven right. The rest of us, we didn't send our laundry out for 3 years. I mean, really, it was just because, we'd all been burned.
Yeah.
How many pilots, how many shows had Bernie Coppell done that did not last a season. I mean, he should have a Purple Heart for the number of shows
Yeah.
that were canceled under his watch. And Gavin, of course, had done a number of shows and was on a phenomenally successful show, Mary Tyler Moore. But he was the only guy on that show that was never nominated for an Emmy. So to some degree, he was in the back of their pack. But his enthusiasm and confidence in this project was boundless, and eventually it affected all of us because, and of course, it didn't hurt that the show's ratings took off from the very first performance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So after a while, you have to take yes for an answer.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
And do you remember the first time that you actually met all the cast, the principal cast? Do you remember that first meeting when you all kind of came together?
Yeah, it was actually it was on location because the first show that we did was actually on the Princess. It was not actually the Princess, it was the Queen Mary that we were shooting on, so it never went anywhere, but they were using that ship. And so it was all, hi, how are you? Nice to see you. And happily we got along, but I don't think we actually congealed until mid-season, which is still early.
Very.
And there were, some quick bonding relationships. Ted and I got along immediately because we were considered to be kind of the afterthoughts of the show, and so we utilized our time as creatively as we could to make whatever few moments we had on the show as memorable as possible. So there was a kind of survival of the fittest that entered our relationship, and of course Bernie joined us. And of course, Cindy, Lauren Tweez, was not hired until the day before the first day of shooting.
Oh, come on.
No, absolutely true. I mean, I know this because she was on our podcast and told us that. So, why would I spread lies? I'm not in Congress anymore. So the bonding issue began early and stayed late. And to my knowledge, John, and I say this now respectfully because with this podcast that Ted and Jill and I are doing, which is called the Official Love Boat Podcast, and we're interviewing a lot of people that have been on our show, and of course, many of them were on hit series like MASH and other shows like like Dynasty and shows like that. But even though those casts worked well together, I believe we are the only cast who has congealed into a lifelong friendship long after the show has gone off the air. I mean, Ted and Jill and I did a play together in Michigan last year. We're going to do another one in New York this summer. So we look for ways to work with one another, and that is unusual.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I think it's unprecedented, quite honestly, because, yes, sometimes you get cast because of your high profile in a particular show. But these days, we actually put the shows together, go to various theaters, and sell our ensemble.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
just so I don't forget, Fred, why don't you tell, and then obviously we're going to be talking about the Love Boat, if whoever's listening, but tell me, what is you mentioned the podcast, the Love Boat podcast that you've put together. Why don't you just give me a little bit of, for my listeners, what it's going to be and where they might find it or where we're at?
Well, we're just at the initial stages of pitching it. We just finished what we call our pilot episodes, and the two guest stars that we lined up, who couldn't be more different, but were both absolutely delightful, were Juliet Mills, who, as I said, had done 8 episodes of The Love Boat, holding the record.
Wow.
Surpassing Charo, who most people think has done more than anybody else, and Jimmy Walker.
There.
And Jimmy Walker, who is an entire show unto himself. And so there couldn't be a greater contrast, but they both had wonderful stories to tell. Juliet, of course, growing up in a historic theatrical family with her father and sister Haley, and Jimmy being a street guy, a comedy guy who and he tells this wonderful story on our episode where he He didn't even know he was on Good Times until they called him in Fargo, North Dakota and said, "Hey, where are you? You're supposed to be on the set." I mean, so
Before we go on with the interview, I just wanted to remind you to please subscribe to That's Classic if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell so that you'll know when my next episode is being released. Okay, let's go on with the interview.
So, I mean, and those are the kinds of stories that we try to get into. What happened behind the scenes, below decks, backstage. Of course, if you were on a hit show like Jimmy was with Good Times, what was that like? What was it like for Juliet growing up in a prestigious theatrical family? So every guest star has their own story, but they're all connected by the relationship on Love Boat. And one of the things that we've discovered, even in the short run that we've been putting together these pilot episodes, is that almost all the actors, the guest stars that came on the show, looked at it as a kind of haven or oasis where everybody treated you with respect and dignity and kindness and friendship. And that was not always true on their own shows.
Yeah.
And so Love Boat became a kind of safe harbor for a lot of actors, many of them high-profile actors, many of them coming up. I mean, Tom Hanks was on our show before anybody knew who Tom Hanks was.
Yeah.
And so we made it, and this was really something that I have to give credit to Gavin MacLeod for, is he made it very clear very early on that one of our jobs, beyond just doing our roles and showing up and saying our lines, was to create an atmosphere of hospitality and congeniality for anybody who came on the show, regardless of who they were or what they were doing, so that they felt welcomed. And talking to Juliet and Jimmy over the course of these 2 episodes that we just recorded, that's what they took away. They loved doing the show because they felt so welcome. And so that's something that we're all very proud of, because I don't know, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but we had well over 1,000 guest stars, and almost all of them came back many times because they liked working the show. They liked being around the people.
Wow.
Not always the case on a TV show.
Oh, what a compliment. Yeah, without a doubt. And Gavin MacLeod, I mean, look, I as you well know, I had Ted on my show as well, and
Absolutely.
who I can't even tell you how much I like. But Gavin MacLeod, he feel, as Ted put it, he said he was the patriarch.
He was. Pater familias.
Yeah, what was your personal relationship like with Gavin?
I had done a brief shot on the Mary Tyler Moore show long before Love Boat, and had met him enough to say hi. Wasn't much more beyond that. But from day one, he was very approachable, very accessible, very much an ensemble guy, even though we understood that he was first among equals. And that was not a problem for any of us. But he was very much the captain of the set as well as the captain of the ship, because, as I told you, he said, "We are here to host these guest stars." It was understood, John, pretty early on, and we never really pushed back against it. The priority on the show was the ship, the guest stars, then probably Gavin, and then the rest of us. And that was a comfortable hierarchy for all of us. And because of that, nobody's ego got out of shape. Nobody became obstreperous and difficult to work with. I mean, of course we had guest stars who sometimes could be a little prickly, but all of us knew exactly who we were, where we belonged, and what we were supposed to be doing. And that prevailed throughout the run of the show. Wow. Unusual, quite honestly.
Yeah, no, that really is. What, for you, when you look back, what are some of the funniest moments, I guess, that kind of pop into your head that either happened during shooting or, offset? What would you say?
Well, I guess memorable moments for me were working with people like Ethel Merman, who played my mother.
Yeah, right.
And I'll tell you a story about that did not actually happen on camera, but did happen in the makeup room. My daughter, Mariah, who is an actress and singer herself, and is just about to go out on the national tour of Suffs.
Fantastic.
As a young girl, pretty much knew she wanted to be a musical comedy person, and listened assiduously to recordings of Julie Andrews and Ethel Merman, and so when I came home one day, and she was about 9 at the time, I said, "Honey, guess who's on the show this week?" And she said, "Who?" I said, "Ethel Merman." She goes, "Oh, can I meet her?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Let me see." So I broached the subject, and Ethel was very amenable. But of course, in those days, I think it's probably still true, women were in makeup at 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I said to my daughter, I said, "Look, if we want to see her, the best time to see her is at the beginning of the day when she's not, busy shooting and memorizing lines." And she had a couple of musical numbers, of course, because she was Ethel Merman.
Of course.
So I said, "If you get up early, I will take you down to the set. We'll go into the makeup room, and I will introduce you to Ethel." Oh. So she's very excited. So we do that. And we walk into the makeup room, and Ethel is sitting in a makeup chair looking at herself in the mirror. Now, Ethel at the time was mid-70s. And it's not just true of women that age, but just about anybody at 5:30 in the morning before they have makeup on is a little scary. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So she's sitting there, and we're standing behind her. She's looking at herself in the mirror. And I say, "Ethel, hi. My daughter Mariah is a huge fan of yours, and she just wanted to come down and say hi." And Ethel swings around in her chair, scaring both of us, and says, "Call me Grandma."
Oh, man.
And my daughter has never she's never gotten over that. I mean, she tells that story every time she has an interview.
Oh,
So it's stuff like that. And then of course there was throwing out Harvey Korman's hairpiece in a box of sushi when we were in Japan. But
come on, tell me
who
this
hasn't
story.
done that?
What?
Well, we were on location in Japan,
Uh-huh.
and we broke for lunch, and we were sitting in one of our trailers, and it was me, Bernie, I think, and Harvey Korman and Mariette Hartley, who was on the show, and we're eating sushi and chopsticks and everything, and goofing off as we frequently did between takes. And Harvey had a hairpiece that he wore, which he named Skippy. I don't know. I'd never asked. But sometimes between takes, he would take it off. Maybe it wasn't that comfortable. I don't know. But somehow during the course of that lunch, and I don't know what else we talked about, one or all of us, I don't know who actually did it, got his hairpiece, put it in a container of sushi, and threw it out. And these are not cheap things, John. These hairpieces. There was a guy in Hollywood whose name was Ziggy, who was kind of the hair maestro to the stars, and he did not come cheap. Bernie had one from him, and Harvey had a couple. Now, fortunately, he had a backup. I don't know what the name for the second one was, but but yeah, I mean that was the kind of stuff that happened from time to time.
Oh,
and he was very gracious about it. I mean, it wasn't as though he flew into a rage and said, "Hey, I want my trusses back." I just so yeah, I mean, but those kinds of stories are the things that stay with you long after you forget what episodes you were in.
I believe it. I believe it. By the way, a lot of my listeners, they like to know, like, what was I realized that you had moments where you were on the ship, but you also had moments on set at the studio.
Oh, we had 2 full sound stages at 20th Century Fox.
Yeah. What was the layout like? Like, a lot of my listeners like to know, like, it sounds mundane, but they actually want to know, like, what was the layout of the set like as you went across? Kind of like a sitcom. Here's the living room. Here's this. Here's that.
Well, there were separate sets, as they usually are on a film set.
Mm-hmm.
We had a full 2-story set for the purser's lobby because there was a winding staircase.
Yeah, I remember.
Went up to the second floor. There was, of course, an entire Acapulco lounge where we did musical numbers and also had the bar that Isaac tended. And then there was the choral dining room. Now, back in those days, it's no longer true on ships, but there were two seatings for dinner, and you went to one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So people would sit at tables. Sometimes they were paired with people they liked, sometimes they weren't. But in any event, it was very much communal dining. These days, cruise ships have restaurants and you go when you want. And in a way, I kind of miss that because as a matter of fact, that reminds me, when we were doing our Panama cruise through the Panama Canal, I brought my father-in-law along. Now, my father-in-law was a small Midwestern certified public accountant. He was a fundamentalist Christian and a rock-ribbed Republican, and he got seated next to Jimmy Walker for 10 days. His name was Eldred Goff, and after 3 days, the entire ship knew him because Jimmy had renamed him as Big L. So, I mean, and you don't get that anymore because there's no way he would have gotten a chance to sit next to Jimmy. And there's a story I probably can't tell because it used some rather dicey language. But
well, how about if we just kind of step around it? But maybe, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I can tell you this story, but I'm going to have to use the language. Can you cut it out?
If you want me to, I can. Sure.
Well, no, I don't want you to. I mean, I just told it on the podcast.
Depends what the words are. Yeah.
No, here's the story. Here's the story. Jimmy, for some reason at the time, was experimenting with a new form of grammar. So rather than end a sentence with a period, he would end it with the phrase "and shit." Okay. Yeah. So he would say things, I'm doing my act in Las Vegas and shit. And these people come up to me and they want my autograph and shit. And so I'm talking to them and we're talking back and forth. And then I go back to my dressing room and shit. So 10 days of this. All right. Jimmy's here. My father-in-law is sitting right next to him. So we get to Miami. My father-in-law had a great time. He loved going through the canal. And we're getting off the ship. And I said, Eldred, do you want to split a cab to the airport? And he said, no. I think I'm going to stay in town and see some friends and shit. That's okay. Yeah. All right. The Jimmy Walker influence has now penetrated his Christian veneer, and now he talks like this.
Oh,
but anyway, I mean, those are kinds of things that you would only have when you sat communally with people you otherwise would never meet in your life. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was on cruise ships at that time, and you are absolutely right. It was like that. Yeah, that it was totally different.
And by the way, these are the kinds of things that we tell on our podcast now because, at the time, we were just collecting stories, not telling them.
Yeah, no, I get it. I totally get it. And by the way, just so I have this, so the layout then is you walked in, you'd see the two stories of
well, though there was also a deck in the studio where you would come up the gangway, cross the deck, and go into the purser's lobby, and that was essentially a set and a half. Wow. We would greet the passengers on this deck as they came off the gangway, and then they would go into the purser's lobby, and you'd usually cut and then start filming there. And then we had a series of cabins where we would shoot guest cabins and the crew cabins
next to each other.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it looked like a corridor of cabins. But we also had railings because this is long before digital photography, long before computer graphic imagery. So the only really technical cheat we had on the show, because, of course, we went to all of these locations. None of this computer graphic imagery for us. We had to go there. Oh, it's torture. But
please.
But normally, the one technique we did use was what they called a process shot. And you probably know what that is. We would have a railing of the ship, and against that, they would put a backdrop of the sea at night or the sea at day. And that's where you would usually film the more intimate romantic two scenes of people. But that was really the only technical cheat that the show did. the rest of the time, if we were at sea, we were at sea. We shot all the interiors inside, of course, cabins and purser's lobby and Acapulco Lounge and so forth. But if we shot in Italy, we were in Italy. If we shot in Greece, we were in Greece. We shot at the pyramids. We shot in China. So I'm not sure you'd get that these days,
No.
John, because the technology is such that you green screen everything. No
That's
green
right.
screens in our day. Had to go there.
Oh,
Torture. Yeah.
what a dream job.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, really. People that I work with recently, when I'm doing a television show these days, don't really have a concept of that. A lot of people do not know what it is to be on location. As Jill frequently says, we were the White Lotus of our generation.
That's hysterical. It's a great
Right.
comparison. What's really funny too is that you're the technical aspect where they're like I know all those scenes you're talking about, the romantic moment on like the back
Sure.
deck or whatever. But the truth is I bought it 100%.
Well,
That
so did
like
everybody. I mean, come
that
on.
moonlight background on the water. They did a great job. I mean, it didn't to me, I didn't go, wow, does that look fake? It was just like it kind of blended right in.
People wanted to believe it. They
Yeah.
wanted to believe it. The whole combination, the winning combination of romance and escapism is what made the ship the star,
Wow.
and what gravitated people not just to the program, but to the cruise industry, because it exploded once Love Boat became a hit.
Oh yeah.
Ted may have told you this, but when we started on the show, Princess had 3 ships: the Island Princess, the Pacific Princess, which were their large ships, and by that I mean they had 750 passengers, and then they had a small ship called the Sun Princess, which was almost like a large yacht.
Yeah.
Carnival Line, which is now the corporation that includes Princess and 9 other lines. Princess alone has 18 ships and continues to build them, and they tend to be between 3,500 and 4,500 passengers.
Oh my
So the Island Princess could fit inside the ships that we use today.
Oh, is that
But
incredible?
all of that happened because Love Boat created this mystique and milieu about the cruise industry that turned into an absolute bonanza for companies like Viking and NCL, Norwegian Cruises, and Royal Caribbean, and of course, Princess.
Yeah, nobody talked about cruises. I mean, on
No,
the
no, it was
level
for
of
old
an
people. I mean, they would
exactly.
sail from Los Angeles to Hawaii, and a couple of people would keel over in their linguine and die during the course of
That's
the.
true.
That's what cruising was. But
Right.
but once it became accessible and visibly accessible through our show, they started booking passengers right and left and said, "Oh my God, we got to build more ships. There are too many people want to go on these things."
I mean, that's pretty incredible when you think
No, it
about it.
is.
What
It
other
is.
show can you say has done that? I mean, that's
I
really,
don't know any other show that had the product placement that we did.
oh man, that's
I mean,
incredible.
maybe Route 66 back in the day for Corvettes, but who remembers that?
Not on the level of, yeah, not on the level
No,
of
no,
Love Boat.
no, no, no,
So
no.
what, okay, when you're on set and you're at the regular studio, you're not on the ship. What was a typical day like for you? Like, was there a lot of downtime? What was it like?
There was a fair amount of downtime for the regular cast because we were interstitial. We would come
Mhm.
on sometimes at the beginning of the season or an end of the scene. This was most true for Ted and myself.
Yeah.
Um, and then, as the show developed, we began getting stories of our own and would have uh, more to do. But the show itself, it was an hour show, as you know,
Yeah.
and it was a very fast and to some degree rough shooting schedule because we would shoot 10 pages a day. Nobody does that anymore.
Hmm.
And it was a 6-day shoot. So they'd have to have an entire hour show done from a Monday to the following Monday because we didn't shoot on the weekend when we were on set.
Yeah.
And so a typical day would be you'd show up, you'd go into makeup, You might have, and the days were usually broken down into the Acapulco Lounge Day because there was music and dancing and a lot of extras and crowd scenes. So that took a long time to shoot. And then maybe the Coral Dining Room, which was the same thing with all of this food, of course. And then there would be a day where you were what we would call hellos and goodbyes when people were coming on the ship and going off the ship. And then you would have your cabin scenes. And incidental scenes in and around the ship. And depending how busy you were, you could come in, maybe you'd be called at 7:30, be in makeup by 8, and be done by 8:30 for the rest of the day. I mean, this was true for people like Ted and Bernie and I.
That's amazing. So would you just
or you could be in there all day long. I mean, it really depended on what the schedule was and how much or how little you had to do in the show. So, and this was particularly true when we were on location, because again, the cast by that time had stories and we were prominently featured in various episodes, but not every one.
Right.
So, if we're in the Greek Isles, you might be able to have a free day in Mykonos just because you weren't shooting that day.
Oh, you've got to be.
So we had the best of both worlds. We had first class travel around the world with this very attractive job and lots of free time to enjoy it. And of course, by the time we went to a lot of these places, the show was a hit internationally. I mean, it eventually wound up, I think, in 85 countries.
Oh.
So it's funny. We were in Turkey. We were in Istanbul, and we had this guy who was kind of our, I guess we could call him our handler. He was kind of the person that took us around and took care of the cast. His name was Gino. And so we're sitting in this little outdoor cafe in the harbor of Istanbul. And this guy was, how do I describe this? He was somewhat effete. How shall I say?
Okay, all right.
And smoking cigarettes and so every time the waiter would come and give us something, he'd say merci. And finally I said, Gino, how come you're Turkish? How come you're saying merci in French to this guy? He says, well, in Turkey, the word for thank you is so long and complicated. By the time you get it out, you're not grateful anymore. So, but it was in many of these places, it was like being the Beatles. They had to cordon off areas so that we could walk through and not be, inundated by crowds.
Oh my!
And the show took off very quickly, John. I mean, by the third season, we were pretty much an international hit.
So were you the first time that you went overseas, so to speak, whatever that country was?
You mean not Mexico or Alaska?
Exactly. When you went over and you got off the ship, was there any part of you that was like, oh my gosh, they, like you said, like we were like the Beatles. Were you a little shocked by it?
Yes. Now, all of us are advancing in years and dispute which was the first major overseas location we went to. You speak to Bernie, he'll say it was Europe. You speak to Jill, she said it was Scandinavia. I think it was Australia, but I may be wrong too.
Yeah.
But by the time we did go to Australia, the show was a hit in Australia. So there were press conferences and dinners and stuff like that. And it was astonishing because we said, hey, the world knows who we are. And again, we were in Turkey with the same shoot that I'm telling you about. And we were in a tiny little village called Kuşadası, which was on the Aegean Sea and was a beautiful location. And this little village had a series of shops, and one of them was a leather shop. And they were apparently well known for their leather goods. So I was in there I guess I was in uniform because I walked into this shop and I was looking at some of the leather, and the guy was the proprietor, goes, he runs outside and shouts to the street. He says, Mr. Gopher is here. And all of these people pressed their faces against the window. It was like, it's like The Walking Dead. Oh my God, if they get here, what's going to happen to me? So I mean, but that's what we dealt with quite a bit, quite a bit.
Oh my gosh. I'm
Yeah, no,
sorry. What, how did, look, I've asked this of other actors I've had on the show that, went from like, I don't mean, I hate that term, nobody to somebody, but, in essence,
that works for me.
yeah, okay, there you go.
Yep, yep.
What was that like to suddenly be like, you're just walking on the street in LA or whatever, and nobody knew who the heck you were, to suddenly it's like everyone knows your face. What did some people it's very hard for them, others it's
Yes.
an easy adjustment. What was it like for you?
Well, regardless of how it is approached individually by various people, nobody goes into this business to become anonymous. So if you do get this recognition, you're lucky if you have to learn how to deal with it. Now,
True.
in our case, again, because we knew what the pecking order was in the show,
Hmm.
we knew that we were part of this star vehicle. But none of us believed that we were the reason the show was a hit. It was a collective effort, a collaborative effort, and a lot of it depended on this great big um, non-sentient being that we got on in the harbor.
Yeah.
So to some degree, that mitigated the ego problems that sometimes you get if your show takes off, and all of a sudden you're a bigger hit than you can deal with.
Hmm.
So we, for the most part, enjoyed it and utilized it to our advantage, and still do. I mean, let's face it, Jill and Ted and I don't do plays because we are known for our Broadway credentials. We're known because of our identification on Love Boat, and I've got a
Sure.
poster on my wall right now that says starring the Love Boat cast.
Hmm.
So if that can parlay into the kind of legitimate theater work that a lot of us as actors really gravitate to.
Very much so, yeah.
So what's the matter with that? And it was interesting when we were interviewing Juliet Mills. Her father, of course, was a very well-known and successful British actor, John Mills, who won an Oscar for Ryan's Daughter,
He's
and
huge.
and was from time he was a young man. Um, but he came over to do the show with her and her sister Haley,
Hmm.
and Juliet said he always looked upon this job, this business, as a gift because most people don't get that gift. Most people do not make it to that level. It's not necessarily a function of their talent, but I've always said you need three ingredients to succeed in this business. You need talent, discipline, and luck.
Hmm.
You can get by with two, but not with one. So you can have wonderful talent and discipline and be okay, but if you want to get people to remember who you are, luck has to enter into it. And people like John Mills and others who, a lot of them, of course, trained in the British theater, which is a
Of
different
course.
discipline than we have in this country, understood that and knew how to manage it when success came along. And he
Hmm.
was very unassuming and very outgoing and affable, and we all gravitated to him. And I think people like that influenced us. Said, look, if we're gonna be successful, I want to be like a guy like John Mills and not somebody on a hit show who crashes and burns within a season or two because their head gets too big and explodes.
Right. I totally get it. And by the way, I had Juliet on the show and she
Oh,
specifically
really?
talked
Great.
about she was well, first of all, she is class, as classy as they come and genuine.
Absolutely charming.
Yeah.
Absolutely charming. And
Lo
and a
Loved
great
her.
friend of our show.
Yeah, very, very good. And she's talked about that moment. And it's funny. I can hear her voice in my head saying
Yep.
"daddy" because
Yeah,
that's what
no,
she
no. There's
calls her
exactly the
father.
same thing that happened on our show.
Yeah. And and she was talking about that discipline and how
Mhm.
it's a job and
Sure.
that's what she was brought up with and that's how you have to understand that. And so that was really interesting. What guest stars for you outside of like Ethel Merman? Obviously, she's your mom, but what other
Mhm.
ones came on that for you you could have pinched yourself? That wow. This is who's here.
Um, well, um, I because of Love Boat, while we were on hiatus early on one season, I got offered How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying on a summer tour called the Kenley Circuit,
I
which
love that play, by the way.
played
Yeah.
Ohio. Yeah. Well, so I'm a young guy, so I'm playing Finch. I'm playing the Bobby Morse part, and Bigley was Don Ameche.
Oh,
So Don Ameche and I toured in this show for a summer, and then eventually he came on. He came on the show, but Don did How to Succeed before his career took off again. This is long before Trading Places and Cocoon, and I was billed above him.
what?
I mean,
What?
talk about no justice, no peace. But it didn't bother him because he was a working guy and he understood his role. But he was a tremendous influence on me, really more so on that tour than the Love Boat, because I don't think we really had any shows together. So he was a profound influence on me.
Well, what did you talk? What did you guys talk about when you weren't, obviously in character? You had that much time with him. I mean, Don Ameche is a legend.
Yeah, well, that's we talked a little bit about that, and of course when we were touring and How to Succeed, he took me out to dinner every night, John, and never once let me pay, not
Oh,
once.
Oh,
And he would critique my performance, which would make some actors, a little upset, but he was so good at it
mhm.
that I relished his input. So he was one. Um, I wrote a show because I think I wrote 9 or 10 episodes of Love It. Some of them with Bernie Kopell, some on my own.
Yeah, I noticed that. I saw
But
that you had written
but
quite a
but
few.
I did it out of desperation for a while because I said, "Am I ever going to get a real romance on this show that doesn't involve drooling over Barbie Benton or being pursued by a chimp?" Both of which happened, by the way. So I started trying to write myself some romances, and I wrote the first one I did was a show that essentially the plot is Gopher meets and becomes attracted to a woman who is essentially coming on the cruise to get away from a bad marriage, and they bond, and um, it looks like things are going to happen in terms of a long-term relationship, but then her husband comes on the ship and wants to get her back. And so Gopher has to, decide, am I going to fight for her? Am I going to let you
Mhm.
prevail? And so that was one show. And then
Who was it?
then
Who was the
it was
actress?
Jill St. John.
Oh my gosh.
It was Jill St. John.
I know that episode.
No,
Yeah.
no, it was a great episode. She was wonderful and great to work with. And then there was a wonderful actress who did our show 3 or 4 times. And I wrote a show about a relationship where you start out as mortal enemies and become lovers at the end. And this woman in this show was a customs inspector. And if you're on cruise ships, you know that sometimes customs can be your worst enemy when you're getting off the ship, because if it goes too slowly, people back up, they get crabby, and then your schedule is in the toilet, so you don't necessarily leave on time. Well, that's
Mhm.
and this woman who was played by this wonderful actress named Joanna Pettit,
Oh yeah, I
who
know who
uh,
Joanna
who
Pettit
who
is.
you would know if you saw her face. I'm not sure
Yeah.
she's active anymore, and she'd done the show a number of times, and it was a very professional thing, but that was a very satisfying experience for me.
Uh,
Beyond that,
Did
go
you
ahead.
well, let me ask you, did you feel when you wrote it and then you had a larger part, I don't know, did you feel like you got a little bit more respect for your acting abilities as well? Like, you were able to kind of let it go a little bit?
I don't know. I mean, I it's funny. My career in this business has essentially 2 phases. When I started out and I was out in California, I had 2 goals in mind: compensation and career. In other words, I wanted to be a star, and I wanted to be a star in a hurry because I had two small children and I needed to make money in this business. And Love Boat came along and provided that opportunity. After I had left the show and served in Congress and ran Goodwill Industries and had a radio show in Washington, and about a little over 10 years ago, decided I'd like to try this again. I said to myself this time, you know what? I think I'd like to give this acting thing a try.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went and got a Master's of Fine Arts degree from Michael Kahn on the Washington Shakespeare Theater. And now when I do things, my two goals are craft and community. That's why I work in these small regional theaters, because I get to play parts I never will. I mean, I just finished playing Lady Bracknell in The Importance of Being Earnest in Michigan. Now, who's going to, Gopher as what? No. But yes.
Sorry, I can't help, but I'm trying to put you in that role.
Oh, I could show you a picture, and it was, I believed it, and so did they. The corset was a bitch, but
oh my gosh.
But other than that, so that's what I do now, and it's far beyond and removed from the spotlight, but it's enormously satisfying. This play that Ted and Jill and I did, I'm Not Rappaport, was a Tony-winning award play years ago on Broadway with Judd Hirsch and Cleavon Little, and we've done this in 2 locations now, and that's enormously gratifying for me. And I also, and Ted directs this, so he's part and parcel of this. For the last 3 or 4 years, I've been touring the country playing Harry Truman in a one-man show called Give 'Em Hell, Harry.
Oh, I could see you as Harry Truman. I could.
Well, let's see. Can you see that?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a great poster, by the way.
No, it is. Too. It is. And so those are the kinds of things that I'm in the business to do now. They make no money. They're not going to get written up on page 6 of the New York Post, but they're giving me the satisfaction of creativity that I didn't always get when I was on TV. But quite honestly, John, I didn't expect it. Mm-hmm. I was there to build a career, and the career to me meant going on game shows and doing the Tonight Show and getting summer stock gigs and all of the trappings of celebrity status, which at the time were very meaningful to me.
Of course.
But after a number of years, and this is probably why I eventually decided to change my life entirely, go back to Iowa and run for Congress, I said, it's like Peggy Lee. Is that all there is? Mm-hmm. And so when I came back, I said, this time, and here's a different thing too, and I'm sure you've had other guests tell you this. Mm-hmm. No matter how important you think you are or how important you actually may be in Hollywood, the business still controls you. You do not control the business.
Right.
They call you or they don't. They offer you something or they don't. And quite honestly, when you've been on a hit series, you sit down for a long time, unless you're
I was just going to say they don't after the hit series for most. Yeah.
And my conviction when I came back into the business is that this time I'm going to control the business. Mm-hmm. It's not going to control me. So that may mean working in Syracuse and not in Hollywood, which is fine. Mm-hmm. And so now I can say that when I want to do something, I do it with the people I want, in the places I want, and the shows I want to do. Mm-hmm. And that, again, is a gift that was bestowed on me by Love Boat, because it gave me the opportunity to develop the resources to do that. So in that regard, I've really had 2 acting careers. And quite honestly, the first one was much more remunerative and built the financial success and security that I enjoy. And this one is much more creative and feeds the soul a little better.
I think it's terrific.
I'm a little highfalutin, but you're getting what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying. I know too well. Fred, we talked a little bit before, but my background is as an actor, and then I slowly have segued myself. But I was pretty successful in voiceover, and then things started to go.
That's a huge career. I mean, that's
great. It was great.
Never cracked that nut myself, but I always admired people.
Oh, it was a dream. But the thing is then everything started going non-union, and times were changing, and I was like, you know what? I'm not enjoying that anymore, because I'm not being paid properly and everything like that. So I backed off. And part of the reason you and I are talking right now is because of that experience. I said, you know what? I'm going to do my own thing. And that's how it came together. So I do understand the idea of now like doing what you just enjoy from a creative standpoint. I feel the same way about my show. So I
Well,
get it.
good,
I
good.
really.
I mean, and to some degree, I think we feel that way about the podcast that Jill and Ted and I are doing because
Mhm.
now we've got enough distance from the show so we don't depend on it, but
Right.
we can remember and relive and um, revel in the successes and the people that we knew and the experiences that they had, and hear wonderful stories about them as well, without the pressure of having to shoot 10 pages a day
Exactly.
or wonder where our career's going to be when our show's canceled.
Right, right. What, hey, by the way, when you were off set, so to speak, whether it was on the cruise ship or on the physical studio set, did you hang out with like the other cast members, or did you guys have a tendency to kind of separate and do your own thing?
No, we hung out and Ted and I initiated something that oh, I can't remember the name of it now.
Oh, your
Um,
club?
yeah, our
Your
club.
lunch
We
club?
talked about it, right? So we
Yeah,
would
but I'd
take
love to
people
hear
like
about it. Yeah,
Ray Bolger and Jack Guilford and people that we had
yeah.
admired from afar, and we started taking them to lunch and just letting them hold forth with all of the wonderful stories of their careers. And of course, a lot of these guys were in the twilight of their careers and not used to having the attention that they'd had when they were younger and bigger.
I'm so
So
envious.
they were, you know, delighted to get
Oh
a
yeah.
free meal and just sit and talk about themselves. And we encourage that. So we did that a number of
Tell me
times.
about Ray Bolger. Well, here, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you this. Ted told me about Gene Kelly, told me about
Mhm.
Jack Guilford, and he told me about I'm blanking out. But he didn't mention Ray Bolger. What did Ray what do you recall one of the stories Ray told you?
Well, not anything specifically, but um, he he was such a veteran of the business and had actually, if you wanted to hear great stories about the Wizard of Oz, the guy to talk to was Billy Curtis, who was one of the Munchkins who came on the show,
Yeah,
and
tell me about that.
he had a version of the show that didn't quite comport with the Tin Man or the Cowardly Lion.
Can you
You
tell
know,
me? I'd love to hear
well,
that.
I mean, it was just. I think obviously the folks, the little people that were on that show that played the Munchkins, um, were treated like little people, and to some degree that was a somewhat demeaning experience. But how much work did you get then or now
No, a lot
if
of
you were that
stories.
that
Yeah,
size
were
and
out
shape?
about that. Yeah.
So he had perhaps a little bit more of a jaundiced view of the Wizard of Oz that Ray Bolger uh, did not. But you know, he would talk about starting out as a dancer and his first big break and his Broadway shows like All American and things like that. And we just ate all that up. I mean, it was just exciting. And of course, now he was at a point where he was not dancing anymore. He wasn't really starring on Broadway anymore. So appearing on Love Boat with Harriet Nelson or whoever he came on with
Mhm.
was was a way to revitalize his career to some extent, but also let us remember who he was. And Aaron made a very big point out of honoring old stars.
Mhm.
And you know the cavalcade of people like Olivia de Havilland and Greer Garson and Helen Hayes, if you please,
Oh, please.
was endless. So and that was very exciting too because and I got to know Ethel pretty well because she played my mother, and we stayed in touch even after she left the show. But you
What
wouldn't
was she
get that.
like, by the way? Because you always just think of that voice, that.
Totally professional, but very naughty. Loved jokes, loved dirty jokes. Um,
Did she have the,
and
quote unquote, the sailor's mouth, they say, or whatever?
well, you had to kind of work to get it because she was obviously a very disciplined performer
Oh
as
yeah.
well. Um, but if you're just hanging around, she would tell some stories. I mean, she had don't get her going on Ernest Borgnine, the guy she was married to for 39 days.
Oh
But
no, no way.
oh, you
Really?
didn't know that? You didn't
I
know
don't
they
think
were
I
married?
knew that about
Oh
her and
yeah.
Ray.
No, 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 no. And so if you could kind of loosen her up just by sitting around and talking and making her feel comfortable, she would start telling these kinds of stories. And that was
Did
of
she
course
tell you
a delight.
any story in particular that you thought was pretty funny?
All I can remember, and again, this is I don't mean to disparage Ernest Borgnine, who also did our show, quite
Oh,
honestly.
please. I don't think that would be taken that way at all.
Well, okay, here's what she said. She said, every disgusting thing in the world he did before lunch. I'm just the messenger, okay? Don't shoot me. I didn't mean it. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, you would get these wonderful stories from these folks, and whether it was Van Johnson or June
Yeah.
Allison or
Oh,
any of these folks,
do you remember
and
any?
of course Leslie Nielsen. You know
Oh,
about Leslie
I love
Nielsen
Leslie
and the
Nielsen.
hand buzzer, right?
Yeah. What
Okay.
yeah,
You
tell me
know,
about Leslie.
well, he had this handheld fart buzzer.
No, I don't think I did
You
know
didn't
that.
know about this?
No.
Leslie Nielsen had a handheld fart buzzer, which he would bring with him everywhere, including the set between takes.
Oh God.
So we're at, again, it's a Coral dining room scene. He's sitting at the captain's table, and he is seated next to his love interest, who happened to be Ava Gabor.
Oh my gosh.
So he's sitting there and talking, and then all of a sudden you go, Ava, please. It was relentless. But here's the interesting thing that the postscript to this story took place after I was elected to Congress,
Yeah.
because for some reason Leslie was in town in Washington, and he might have been testifying on something, I don't know. But apparently one of my colleagues on my side of the aisle persuaded him to turn over his hand buzzer to this colleague of mine. So naturally, this guy thought, oh, I know how I'm going to use this for the State of the Union address. Why not? So, and I don't know if you've ever watched a State of the Union
Oh, I
address,
have.
but the way there are members of Congress lined up on the between the seats on the corridors that lead down into the well.
Yeah.
And then the president goes up onto the dais and gives the speech. But first he has to cross into the room, and it's a very stately, regal profession. And he's followed by distinguished members of Congress and the Supreme Court and the cabinet and all that.
Yeah, totally. I can totally.
But it begins with the doorkeeper of the house, an official title, who comes in and stands at the back of the chamber at the exit, walks in and says, Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States. And then the president comes in. So I think this had to be when George H.W. Bush was president. So this guy, this colleague of mine, I probably won't name him, although he may not even remember, is standing in this line of members of Congress waiting to shake the president's hand. And I'm not far from him. And so this time it goes, Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
Oh my God.
Who did that? The president is coming. Control yourself. What's the matter with you?
Oh my gosh, that takes guts, boy, to do
Well,
that.
it does. It does. But I don't know if it took guts or just absolutely no brains at all. But I can tell you from experience, I think, that almost every member of Congress is a frustrated actor.
Oh, is that funny?
And think they're much better than they are, by the way. But,
Yeah, I'm
but
sure.
But that was one of my favorite moments.
Oh no,
And I don't know if Leslie ever got to see that or hear that, but he would have been proud.
Oh, you would have been so proud of that. That's just too
no.
funny.
Yeah.
Hey, one thing I don't want to miss is you were in quite a few, like you said, shows before Love Boat.
Yes, I was a journeyman actor.
Yeah, you're exactly. Love American Style was
Well,
one.
that's the prototype for Love Boat, of course. You know, the producer of Love American Style was Douglas Kramer, who was one of the original producers of Love Boat. And the show was originally conceived as Love American Style on a boat.
I'll be darned.
Now, it
Okay.
evolved into a much more sophisticated and deep experience than that. But that was originally the formula because Love American Style usually was a half-hour show with maybe two little 15-minute episodes and some sketch stuff
Yeah, the vignettes,
interspersed.
little
And
tiny
and
vignettes.
and
Yeah.
I did one of those
Did you?
when I
I didn't
first.
know that.
I did a Love American Style.
But
I,
was it
I
no, no, I know that, but did you do one so was yours one of the smaller scenes or was it one that
no, it
little
was just it was an actual episode.
Oh, okay, okay,
It was
cool.
one of the, it was remember Michael Conrad, the guy on Hill Street Blues? The
Yes,
tough,
actually I do when
burly
you
guy.
say that.
He and he was I was a waiter. I was kind of a bumbling waiter, and it looked like a mob boss or something. I can't remember the plot, but that was essentially uh, what it was. And then I did a movie that Joan Rivers had written called The
Yeah,
Girl
what was
Most
that called? I
Likely.
meant to ask
It
you.
was
What was
called The
that?
Girl Most Likely.
Yeah, right, with
And
Stockard Channing.
it starred Stockard Channing as one of
Yeah.
her first shows. And this was a very simple story, and I think only Joan Rivers could write this, about a young woman who is harassed and ridiculed and upbraided by a number of men, and she goes back and kills them all. Comedy, of course.
Wow.
And I'm a doctor, and I can't remember what I did, but it was probably something rude. And so I get killed by Stockard Channing in that movie too.
Oh my
And
God. Did
that's
you
all
meet
that's
Joan?
all pre-Love Boat. Of course, I was on Maude for a season too. You know,
Yeah, I was going to say that
one
was
of
the
my
other one I was
first
going to ask you.
that was one of my first experiences in Hollywood.
What was that like? Obviously, B. Arthur. I mean, come on.
Well, yeah, I mean they were all very good people. But to be quite honest, now I don't think I was ready for that. I had just come out of a very successful two-character play with James Woods and
Oh,
gotten a lot of play off Broadway.
wow.
And Norman Lear's casting director is a woman named oh gosh, I can't remember.
Okay.
Jane Murray. Jane Murray.
Mhm.
And she saw me in the show and flew me out to Hollywood to screen test, and I screen tested and I got the job. And I didn't really know what to do. It's not that I was intimidated by the people. It's just that I couldn't quite find the character. It was Adrienne Barbeau's boyfriend, and I wasn't quite sure what was. I did about 7 or 8 of them,
Boy,
but it was
the whole
not
time you were
something that
just
I.
kind of grasping, like,
Oh, well, it was just I just wasn't as confident in the role as I became in
mhm.
other roles. So I did that, and then I did a wonderful Saturday morning, a live action Saturday morning kids show called Monster Squad,
Oh yeah.
where I was the curator of a wax museum,
Ah,
but a boy genius who was able to take the wax statues and turn them into living beings. So you had Dracula, the werewolf, and Frankenstein, and we would go out and fight crime. It was produced by the guy that did Batman, Billy D'Angelo.
oh, I bet you had a
It
blast.
was and they had the same things, the pow, whap, stuff
Yeah.
like that. And we'd have a guest villain every week. And it was a fun show to do, but television on Saturday morning was not ready for live action in the early 80s. So, or the late 70s, I should say. This was in the late
Right,
70s.
right.
So, and stuff like that. Welcome Back, Kotter, Mary Tyler Moore, these kinds of shows. I bounced around.
What was
Um,
Welcome Back, Cotter like? I mean, obviously, I don't know. That was always one of my favorites with Travolta and obviously Gabe Kaplan and
well, actually, I did a show, and the person I worked with the most was George Carlin, who
oh,
was a guest on the show, and he was a disc jockey, and I was his aide, kind of a bumbling. I paid a lot of bumbling guys, preparing for the
yeah.
signature role of Gopher. And so that was it. I mean, I just a little scene here and there. It was mostly his show, but I was in and out.
Did you like? I mean, did you get along with Carlin? I
Oh,
actually,
sure. I mean, what's not to
yeah,
get along with? It wasn't
yeah.
as though I was challenging his authority or anything.
No,
And he
no,
was
no,
nice.
but
He was a
he
nice
was a
enough
more
guy.
timid person. I actually met George Carlin many years ago when he had his own show as well, and I
Mhm.
found him offset to be kind of a little more timid than he was when he got in front of the camera. He got, a little more
He,
quiet.
he was not effusive, but he was not standoffish either. I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
he
Oh,
was
no, 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 no. No, I agree.
approachable.
What about
Yeah.
the Charlie's Angels episode? That's obviously Love Boat Angels, What
Well,
that
that was
the
one of
one with
those
Shelley Hack.
cross pollination things that Aaron did a lot of.
Yeah.
Um, and at the time it was Jacqueline Smith and Kate Jackson and Cheryl Ladd. Shelley Hack came later. Of course, they all did Love Boat as well. No, actually, they didn't. Kate Jackson didn't do it, and I'm not sure. Well, of course, Farrah Fawcett never did it.
Right,
Um,
right.
Jacqueline Smith did it. I think Cheryl did it. I know Shelley Hack did it.
Yeah.
But we didn't have that much to do on the show. We were essentially welcoming the angels onto the ship, and then the crime or whatever it was took place. Now I have to tell you, I never saw the show because, and this was true. I'm as an actor at the time, I never watched anything I did. Never.
Why is that?
I just was not able to watch myself on camera because it just made me, it made me too twitchy. I'd say, oh, why did I do that? Why didn't I do this? And so I started watching Love Boats about 2 years ago and said, it wasn't so bad. But
Two
that's,
years ago.
that's 45 years between episodes. And now, of course, I watch them because we're interviewing guest stars. But
How do
yeah,
you feel?
I've just look. There are a lot of actors that cannot watch their work.
No, I know,
And
I know.
and
How do
I
you
was one of
feel,
them.
though? How does
I
it make you feel now that when you look at yourself now?
Well, it looks like somebody else. I said, I don't know who that young person is. He vaguely resembles me. He's not doing a terrible job, and more power to him. I hope he does well.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but the distance is what allows me the perspective.
Wow, that's a long time. I mean,
It
Fred, I didn't
was.
expect you to
It
say
was.
that. That's a long
No,
time.
and the recent things I do, I don't watch either.
Wow, isn't that something?
I just
But
don't.
I have heard other actors say that, by the way.
No, I'm not alone.
Yeah,
I'm not alone. It's not
yeah.
necessarily unique.
Is that ever interesting? What about, Fantasy Island? You were on there for three different times you were on Fantasy Island.
Whatever you say, I didn't watch that either.
Yeah. Do you remember though, like Ricardo Montalban and
Well, I remember Ricardo, of course. He was very gracious, and Hervé, who was, troubled. He was a nice guy, but he was a
yeah,
little troubled.
Ted was telling me this same thing. He said with Hervé, it was a little you didn't know who you were going to get kind of thing.
No, it's true. And I didn't have a whole lot to do with him in the episodes that I did do. So, that's kind of a vague. But I did the spelling shows. I did a Matt Houston. I remember
With
when
Lee Horsley?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lee was on a cruise with us. He came to China with us, actually.
Really? What was he like?
Yeah, it was
He's
funny.
kind of an enigma, to be honest with you. I don't hear anything about him. What was he
Well,
like?
I don't. Well, he was a lovely guy. I mean, I remember we were in Shanghai. Now you got to understand, we were in China before anybody else went to China.
Good point.
We were there before Tiananmen Square. We were there before China became the power to be reckoned with globally that it is now.
Wow,
So they
that's
were just
amazing.
happy to have people like us, but it was still very provincial and very backward. And so we were in Shanghai between shoots, between scenes, and we go to lunch. And in those days, menus were not in English; they were in Chinese.
Oh my God.
And you had no idea what you were getting. So we walk into this little place in Shanghai, and they didn't speak English. We didn't speak Chinese. So somehow we gestured, we just want their best stuff on the menu. So they come out, they bring these things. This is Chinese food I'd never seen in my life. They brought out a plate of not just dead birds,
Oh,
but charcoal dead birds with their feet up in the air.
oh, come on.
And no, I'm serious. And we're looking at these. And then they bring out a bowl of things that looks like it's rigatoni.
Oh.
But it wasn't, because when we went to reach in, they started crawling away.
Oh, come on, Fred. Oh.
No, I'm serious. I'm serious. So Lee Horsley, who was profoundly affected by this, calls the proprietor over and again, no communication skills whatsoever. And he starts saying things like, sweet and sour pork. Moo Goo Gai Pan, and this guy's going, oh no,
Right.
no. So
Oh,
we went hungry that day.
oh, I'm
But
sorry.
and this is true. I mean, Chinese food in China is
Yeah.
not the Chinese food you get over here.
No, no, no.
And that, by the way, this is one other story I'll tell you about trying to eat over there.
Oh,
We were in Hong Kong, and of course, we were in Hong Kong before it became Chinese. It was still a British protectorate
right,
when we
right.
were there. But very upscale restaurant in town, and we were not at this table, but Yvette Mignon, I think Gene Kelly, and some other people were sitting at a table. And somebody had decided they wanted the specialty of the house, which was monkey brains.
Oh,
Okay.
no. Oh, no.
Now, you think that's bad? Here's how they prepared it. This very elegant and dignified Chinese waiter would come out, and he was wheeling on a little cart a live monkey with a kind of choker around his neck.
Oh, my
Okay.
gosh. Oh,
And he brained the monkey at the table.
Oh, no.
And Yvette got up and ran away. I mean, it was just, but and that was considered a delicacy, John. Is live monkey brains straight off the top.
oh, my God.
Now, my guess is they don't do that anymore. I mean, communism has some benefits, and I assume that has to be one.
Did
of
you
them.
literally like, was
We saw the
everybody
whole
just in
thing.
shock?
We're sitting a number of tables away, but we're saying, "Oh my God, he's not going to do that," and he did. He cold cocked the monkey, opened its brain, and pulled the brains out.
Oh,
And it's
gosh.
something he'd obviously done 2 or 3 times a day.
Oh, is that crazy? Wow.
No, thank you. So
Yeah.
anyway,
No, thank you. Yeah, I'm good.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
taking it kind of forward, and I kind of wanted to mention this because of your son, but you did several episodes of the Mindy Project, which your son Charlie, I
Yes,
believe,
he was a
wrote.
writer and executive producer of the Mindy. He and Mindy do a lot of projects together. They're currently developing a show called Murray Hill, which is about young people coming to New York and starting careers. And this is what he does when he's not producing our podcast. But he's done all kinds of things. How's this for a career? Charlie went to Harvard, and he was a member of the Harvard Lampoon, which is their
Yeah.
satirical magazine, which is great training for comedy writers.
Mm-hmm.
So he and a friend of his, a classmate of his, go down to New York, and just on a lark, we'll get a job in New York and do
Yeah.
something. Well, they did. They actually got a job on a pretty new show called The Daily Show,
Oh, you're kidding.
which was just transitioning from their old host, Craig Kilborn, to a guy named Jon Stewart.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so they're there at the absolute onset of Jon Stewart and his
Wow.
reign as one of the top comedy
Oh.
people. So they start writing that show for a while. And of course, comedy writing is very competitive and brutal. You sit down in the morning, you go over the paper, you write your jokes, and then sometime around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, you go in to a room where all of the producers are sitting around, the writers, the directors, and you have the joke read. And each one of you has to read your jokes, and people sit there going, no.
Right.
Oh, okay, maybe.
Yeah, that's
And so,
brutal.
you know how demeaning that can be.
Oh yeah.
But that's what he grew up with. So after a few years, he gets kicked out of the nest. His partner goes to work for Conan O'Brien. Charlie goes to SNL and starts working with Jimmy Fallon and Tina Fey and Mindy, of course. And he works there for a while, wins an Emmy.
Oh my gosh.
And then he gets an offer from some of his SNL colleagues who had moved out to Los Angeles to start a new show and said, "Hey, Charlie, would you consider becoming a staff writer?" That show is The Office, John.
Oh, come on.
No.
I
So he
mean,
goes out
wow.
and he's writing The Office, and that's where he and Mindy began to develop a rapport that took him on to the Mindy Project. But between then and now, he wrote a pilot for Jimmy Fallon, which NBC produced, and it was on for a year. And he and Mindy have done a number of shows now. So I tell everybody, and my daughter is a very successful musical comedy star. I have another daughter who has some common sense. She's a software engineer, so doesn't go through all of the highs and lows.
Right.
But, I tell people if I'd known my kids were going to be this successful, I would have had more of them. Uh, so,
No,
but yeah, I mean, he's
yeah.
he's doing very well. She's doing very well. And as a matter of fact, I just saw my daughter in Fun Home in Syracuse. It's just, God, what a heartbreaker that is. But so I mean, we're a show business family. We're just like we're like Juliet and Haley and John, I
Right.
guess.
That's pretty
Not quite
amazing.
as prestigious, but
Yeah.
similar.
What, look, I looked at your background and I was kind of blown away at how things started with you lost both your parents. It sounded like you weren't even old enough to, or I don't know, maybe you were old enough to take that in, but
Well, I was 11 and 12. My father died
oh
when I
my
was
gosh.
11. My mother died a year later.
Okay, you were very much so then. I
No,
realized. Yeah.
I was aware.
What, how has that affected your life? I mean, obviously you had, I believe her name was, if I get this wrong, I apologize, Margaret Avery. Is that right?
Margaret Avery was my mother's best friend.
Right.
And the story that I was told, and I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, was that one day my mother and Margaret, when they were young women and young mothers, were in downtown Sioux City at some tea room, probably getting hammered at 4 in the afternoon. And they made a pact. My mother convinced Margaret to say, now look, if anything ever happens to me,
Hmm.
will you take care of Freddie? And Margaret said, sure. No,
Right.
no problem.
Right.
And of course that's the kind of commitment you make because you know it's never going to happen.
Exactly. Chances
Well,
are
it did.
right.
And she became my surrogate mother for a number of years and was a tremendous influence on my life and was very helpful in helping me win my first congressional campaign. Uh, she did an ad, which is a tight close up on her, talking about I had been accused of wanting to cut Social Security. So what else is new? Every time, you try to run for office, somebody
I'm
accuses you
sure.
of cutting Social
Yeah.
Security. And she, in a very tight shot, said, and when they tell me he wants to cut Social Security, I get so angry. and,
Wow.
and my campaign manager, who was a fairly big deal in Washington, said, oh my God, that scared me. And I wrote it. So, I mean, I wasn't an orphan. I wasn't out on the street. It's not a Mickey Rooney movie.
No, no,
But
no, no.
but that's a profound influence, and I guess part of it made me mindful of the struggle. That if you want to do things, you've got to do it on your own. You can't wait for things to happen. Mom and dad won't always be there. You
Mhm.
can't necessarily fall back on family or even friends, and you've got to go after what you want. To some degree, that's probably why I left Love Boat and ran for Congress. Nobody was going to offer me a chance to run for Congress. I mean, I had a friend back home who kind of laughingly said, "Why don't you run?" And I said, "Okay,"
Yeah,
without
yeah.
having any idea what it entailed.
Why
But
did you, by the way? I mean, really, anybody would say, "Come on, Fred, you were in a pretty amazing spot in your life. Why turn and go through that?"
well, I think, and of course, some of this was influenced by the fact, I was severely injured on location on Love
Oh,
Boat when I
yeah.
had
Well,
it
why,
burned up in
thank
a
you.
fire. And my hands, I mean, my hands are 20 years younger than I am, John, because I burned all the skin off.
This was a
Um,
hot air balloon accident or something, right?
no, it wasn't a hot air balloon. It was a bunch of party balloons that we were again in this area of Turkey near Kushadasi, going to a party on a cliff that looked down on the Aegean. And for one reason or another, we decided, Ted, Cindy, Lauren, and uh, our second assistant director, a guy named Charlie, um, decided we'd get in the cab and go back to the ship. So we had a bunch of party balloons. And I said, let's take these balloons with us. We'll have a party back on the ship. Okay, fine. And I'm smoking at the time.
Oh, wow.
And so we get in the cab and we piled in, and I have all these party balloons. And either accidentally or on purpose, I touched one of the balloons with the cigarette and exploded. Well, party balloons are filled with helium, right?
Hmm.
Not in Turkey. They're filled with hydrogen.
Oh no.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe they're expecting the Greeks to attack any minute and they want to be ready. I don't
Oh
know.
my
But
gosh.
flames flew up in the air and I burned all the skin off my hands and most off my face.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that recovery was a period where I was still doing the show. I didn't miss any performances or anything,
How
but I
did
was
you not
doing,
miss?
well, because they bandaged my hands, and the next episode we did, it was in Rome, and I had a big story, and I said, I'm not going to miss that. So I just told everybody I had poison ivy. You know, it was bullshit, but it worked.
Wow.
So so then I had to go to a burn clinic in Sherman Oaks for a long time and get squared away.
How long?
But that about a year, about a
Wow.
year.
That's a severe
Had to
burn.
wear special gloves and stuff.
Hmm.
But I used that time to take stock of where I really wanted to be. And at that point, I was also reaching that threshold where I say, okay, this show has given me just about everything I expected in spades, but somehow it's not enough. And then I had, rightly or wrongly, a desire to serve something larger than myself.
Hmm.
And so I had been a congressional aide back before I even went to Hollywood. So I knew something about Washington. I knew something about politics, but I knew nothing about running for office.
Yeah.
Fortunately, because I never would have done it if I'd known how difficult it was.
Interesting.
But so I said, you know, I was approached by this friend of mine who was a political consultant. He said, you know, there was an incumbent member of Congress that they couldn't beat. And I just said glibly, well, I could probably beat this guy. And the next thing I knew, I was out in Iowa lining up donors and supporters.
Wow.
So fortunately, I didn't think about it too long, but it was one of those things where I knew I had a mission, and that was and Iowa at the time was going through a tremendous agricultural crisis. And of course, I knew
What
nothing about farming, but I learned. I studied it all.
what year
And
is that?
well, I went back in let's see, I left in 86. It was 78, 1978.
Okay.
So I'm running for office. No, that's
No,
not right.
no,
No,
no, no.
I left. I went back in 1985 and served from 1986 to
Okay,
1994.
I got you.
But and the accident had occurred in 1984, I think.
Okay.
So I was reevaluating my life and thinking I want something more than just more slots on my resume. I want to feel as though I'm doing something. I want to feel as though I'm giving something back. And to some degree that stayed with me. I mean, even now, when talking about my so-called acting career, the places that I work, small regional theaters, most of them were slammed by COVID
Sure.
and almost closed. And, you know, I've made it my business to try and help them every way I could because they're the real seed corn of American theater. And if you don't keep them going, you're not necessarily going to get great product on Broadway or anywhere else. So that personal sense of purpose and mission has kept with me. This is why, you know, when I left Congress, I became the CEO of Goodwill Industries and became a pretty constant advocate for people with disabilities, physical and cognitive disabilities. And when I was in office, I wrote, along with the other members of my committee, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is the principal civil rights act for people with handicaps.
Yeah.
So all of that, I think, was to some degree triggered by the fact that I was almost killed in this accident. And it was just a crapshoot that I wasn't. Because if the car engine had been on or the windows had been rolled up, game over, just incinerated. So,
Wow.
so that's kind of what I think inspired me to do this. And thank God I didn't think too long and hard about it because I would have really bailed had I known how difficult it was going to be.
Yeah. Kind of jumping off a cliff.
I'll tell you one story, which is, and this is the best political advice I ever got.
Sure.
I'm in Washington as a candidate, and I'm doing a fundraiser at the Republican National, what they call the Capitol Hill Club. And so I'm shaking hands and meeting people, and one of the servers is a young woman, and she sees me, she says, Gopher, "Oh, Gopher." He says, "Why are you here?" I said, "Well, I'm thinking of running for Congress." He says, "Oh, Gopher, why you want to do that?" He says, "You're on Love Boat. Everybody loves you. You go to Congress, nobody even like you." Absolutely true, man. Absolutely
Oh,
spot on. So,
wow,
yeah.
that is it. Yeah. You know what? You know what's cool though about that story is and this happens sometimes whenever I do
Mhm.
this show is people have these moments in their life like you did,
No,
and
you do.
you can look at that and say, "Oh man, I mean, I'm so sorry that happened to you," and I do mean that, but at the same time, it's funny how a moment that looks extremely grim in the moment and what the pain you had to go through and everything like that. But sometimes, that old line about, a door closes, a door opens, and look at what that did. I mean, you literally changed the trajectory of
Absolutely.
your
But
entire life
but
because
underneath all of that was the question that I was really never able to answer, but tried was why me? Why did I make it? How was I able to survive an explosion in a taxi cab in a foreign country, for God's sake?
right,
Turkey.
right. Yeah,
Turkey's
yeah.
not known for its medical community. You know what I'm
No.
saying?
Yeah.
So, so I mean, I, and that just stayed with me. I said, I just can't keep doing what I'm doing and expect it all to make sense. So
Oh, that's
that
cool.
really was the trigger, I think.
Well, I think that's terrific. Because I do kind of laugh, people will be like, "Well, why did you become a congressman? Because you got the power or whatever." And it's
You
like
don't have that
anybody
much
with
power
half
as
a
a
brain,
congressman, I got to tell you.
yeah, that takes a
Yeah.
lot of work. It ain't about the money at that point. That's for darn sure.
Well, it's even more about the money now than it was then. But
Yeah,
even
no, I
back
know.
in those days, in a rural Iowa district, it was close to $1 million to win that race, and that was real money back then.
Wow,
Um,
that was
so
really big money
yeah,
then.
yeah,
Oh my
yeah, and
gosh.
that's one
That's
of the reasons I think I finally pulled out because I said I'm not interested in just keeping the money chase going constantly because once you're in, then you have to run for reelection. You got to raise money. You got to keep going.
hmm
And I just said no after a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah. I
And
got
it's
you.
worse now, John. I mean, now these races are tens and $20 million races,
Oh, it's incredible.
and
Yeah.
you become very beholden to the donors that provide you
Right.
that kind of wherewithal.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And then, yeah, I was going to say, then they've got you. Yeah. No, I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah.
Did you, your time as CEO of Goodwill, did you enjoy that time when you
I
were?
I did because again that was mission specific, and I learned a lot of things about the disability community that I didn't know, and I went all over the world for that place, and to say nothing of the United States. And it's a huge and potent and powerful industry that does all kinds of good. So it was terribly rewarding. It wasn't high profile like being in Congress or being the star
Sure.
of a show, but obviously those helped me get the job
hmm
because we had a lot of business with Congress, and I was involved in a lot of it as their principal spokesperson. So yeah, no, but I knew I was not going to have a long tenure because a lot of these trade associations, particularly in the disability community, are very tight knit and are not prone to a lot of outsiders, and I clearly was one.
hmm
And I realized that if this organization was going to go forward, they probably had to pull their next CEO from their own ranks.
Hmm.
And so I withdrew gracefully, and that's when I went on the radio in Washington.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You've been so gracious, by the way, with all this, but my last question to you, and you only said it for like a brief moment, I heard you in this interview, but it caught my ear. And I was curious what it felt like for you to have this happen. And maybe you're very close with this person and I didn't know. But you said that Helen Hayes sent $100 check to your campaign.
She
Were
did.
you close with her?
No, no, she just was a guest on the show. I'm not even sure I had a scene with her. But um, when I ran for Congress, my campaign people said, "You got to get all these guest stars to give you money." I said, "I can't do that." He said, "Yes, you can. You send them a letter." And I did. So she sends me a check for $100. And I go to my campaign manager and said, look at this. This is a check from Helen Hayes for $100. I said, I don't think we can spend this. I mean, this is just too important. He
Right.
grabs it and said, give me that. I just saw the polls. So, but later, when I was in Washington many years later, I think I was at Goodwill at the time, but her son, James MacArthur, and I were both part of a celebration at the Kennedy Center that hosted local theatrical awards in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Jimmy, I told him this story. And I said, I hope she never regretted giving me that money. She said, oh, no, she felt very strongly about that. And I think it was because the whole idea of giving up a show like Love Boat to go home and get into this somehow resonated with her. And so, we never knew one another. I wrote her, of course, a letter thanking her.
Yeah.
But, yeah. And I've never forgotten that. And James MacArthur made me feel like I did the right thing.
Oh, is that cool?
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, that one really got to me. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, Helen Hayes sent you $100. I just think that's cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
But we had to spend it.
Yeah, I know. I got it. You still had to spend it, even though
I only held on to it for about 5 minutes.
Right. Well, listen, thanks so much, Fred. I mean,
Absolutely.
I enjoyed it just thoroughly. I could talk to you forever. It was just so smooth. And if anybody, by the way, I realize that your podcast isn't out yet with Ted and Jill, but if anybody wants to reach out or find out, or they want an autograph or anything like that, is there anywhere they can go, or is there anything you could tell your
for
fans?
the podcast yet? Or just me, or what?
Yeah, just for you. Like, let's just say if somebody's, because I have people write into me and they're like, hey, is there any way to get a autographed picture of Fred or anything like that?
You've got my email. I mean, that's probably the best way to reach me right now. Eventually, hopefully, if Princess bites at this and we get the thing up and running, then there will probably be a website and a way to deal through that. But in the short run, we're still at the pilot stage. So, hopefully this will happen. But as you know, there are no guarantees in this business.
No, I know. Okay, well, maybe when the website comes up, they can go there and they can get it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I know you have your privacy, and I respect that. Yeah, I got you. Okay, hey, Fred, thanks a bunch. I'll be in touch.
John, enjoyed it?
Yeah, without a doubt. And for sure. I look forward to talking to you down the road.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Hope you enjoyed the interview. Please don't forget to hit the subscription button and also hit the notification bell right after that so that you get notified whenever I have a new episode. And be sure to check out some of my other interviews. Henry Winkler, Jerry Mathers, Angela Cartwright, Shelley Fabre. It goes on and on. They're so great. Enjoy.